Hello, good evening, everyone. You're welcome to today's class on taxation. And my name is Adesua Usaidekere. Thanks for joining us today. I would like us to confirm if you can hear me clearly. I don't think my host is online to confirm that. So please, if you can hear me clearly, kindly send a message to the chat, to the group, to the chat, just through the chat button. Just send a message there to confirm you can hear me clearly. Thank you. And while we wait for about, I don't know if we could kindly wait for about 2 to 3 minutes for others to join us before we continue with our class. Thank you. Okay. Okay, clearly. All right. Thank you very much. So by 7:12, we'll start shortly. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for waiting. I think we can start now. I just got a message from Larry. Please confirm you can hear me clearly. And if you can't hear me clearly, just go to the left corner of your device. You see join audio. Just click on join audio. Then see if you could hear me clearly now. All right, thank you. So we'll begin our class for today without wasting much time. All right. So, but before then, I just want to briefly remind us of our FC Online video lecture rules so we could know them, especially those that are just joining us for the first time. Okay, so for our class rules for online Zoom revision class, it's expected that students are to be muted on both audio and video. And the reason is to allow for proper coordination, okay, to avoid distraction also to the lecturer and the students at the same time. Secondly, students are allowed to use the chat button to ask questions, okay, during the course of the class. If there are areas you need to ask questions on, okay, just send your questions using the chat button, and also ensure that your questions or the information you're sharing on the chat group is done in a cordial and professional manner. Okay, your concerns, please ensure they are cordial and professional. The students are advised to listen attentively during lectures rather than writing. Please, you could have a notebook with you and a pen, okay? So during the course of the class, you could make jottings, attempt questions if any, okay, and note your questions to be asked. probably during or after the class, okay? Then students are advised to listen attentively during lectures rather than writing, since the lecture materials would have been provided ahead of class, okay? So kindly ensure you listen attentively. And students, all questions will be attended to after the lectures. During the course of the class, I could also attend to all questions. So aside our online class, you're free to reach out to me, to call me if you have any questions or issues that relate to taxation. Probably when you're attending questions and you just need to give you a view on what is expected, like the case may be. You can reach me on 081 So let's get started to our topic for today. Larry, kindly send a chat if you could hear me clearly now. I would appreciate that. Okay. All right. For today's class, we'll be looking at returns. For today's class, we'll be looking at returns, assessment, and collection procedures. Okay, a minute, please. Okay, say better now. Not loud, but you could increase the volume of your device if possible. Okay, while I try to speak more loudly for you to hear. Okay, so today we'll be looking at returns, assessment, and collection procedures. When we talk about returns, assessment, and collection procedures, what exactly are we referring to? What are we expected to, what knowledge are we expected to gain? Okay, for the purpose of taxation, all right, it is expected that on an annual basis, okay, companies that are incorporated here in Nigeria are expected to file returns. Okay, for companies to file company income tax, okay, they are expected to file returns, submit their assessment for a period. If a period could be more than 1 year, it could be less than a year. And also there's what we call what collection procedures. How do the tax authorities, okay, responsible for receiving these assessments or receiving these returns from organizations, from companies, how are they expected to collect such form of taxation? So during the course of this class, we'll be looking at registration and filing of tax returns, okay? The assessment procedures was required, the collection procedure, and also be looking at tax clearance certificate, which is also known as what TCC. All right, so let's go straight to filing of tax returns. When we say tax returns, like I mentioned earlier, all companies that are incorporated and are carrying their businesses here in Nigeria, okay? The company, any company that is carrying out their business here in Nigeria, it means that company is generating income here in Nigeria. That organization or company is expected to file its return with FIRS, and that's the Federal Inland Revenue Service. They're expected to file their return with FIRS, which is Federal Inland Revenue Service, okay? And on an annual basis, there are three major documents that are required by these companies to submit to FIRS. One, we have the self-assessment return in a prescribed form. It's a form that is known as the self-assessment form, okay? If you walk into any FIRS office or you meet a tax consultant, there's a form usually called the self-assessment form. The self-assessment form has brief details for the current year, okay? Let me use an example. We have at Lanre Limited, a company was incorporated here in Nigeria, okay? For Lanre, for the year 2018, if Lanre, at the end of the year 2018, if Lanre is to file for his tax returns, the year of assessment to be what 2019, which means at the end of 2018, let's say the accounting year for Lanre is January, every January to December every year. Okay. So by 2019, beginning of 2019, Larry is expected to file his returns towards FIRS. And in filing it, Larry is expected to fill a self-assessment form. Okay. That form, the details in the form includes the revenue Larry has generated during the whole of 2018, its total administrative expenses, its profits before tax, okay, the tax computation done, the company income tax, the education tax, and then in addition, the self-assessment form, there's also a part where the director of the organization and secretary of the organization will sign and submit to FIRS. Then we also have the audited account. It's expected that all incorporated companies will audit the accounts of the organization on a yearly basis. So at the end of the year, the audited account will also be provided in addition to the self-assessment form that has been filled by the organization. All right. Then we also have tax and capital allowance computation. Most times the documents being submitted to FIRS, behind it, after the accounts of the organization, you have the tax computation and the capital allowance, which is in addition to the audited accounts. So these three documents are expected to be submitted to FIRS on a yearly basis. Let's continue, please. So now the next thing we need to know is what time is a company expected to register with the tax authority. For companies, okay, they're expected to register with FIRS. And if they are to register with FIRS, it's expected that within 6 months of commencement of business, every organization should register with FIRS for the purpose of tax. And in registering with FIRS, there are two forms of registration that is done. One, we have the company income tax registration, and secondly, we have the value added tax registration. The reason why companies does these two forms of registration with this relevant tax authority is because FIRS is the tax authority they are the ones required to receive such taxation, to receive such from the companies on behalf of the government. Okay, so every company is required to register within 6 months. For registration requirements and processes, every company registering with FIRS for tax purpose are required to submit two types of letter, like I've mentioned, okay? One for company income tax, the other for value added tax, okay? For company income tax, a letter will be written to FIRS. You register, it has to be on the letterhead of the organization, okay? Applying to register for purpose of tax, and the content of the letter includes one, the name of the company, the contents of the letter. This is where we are, the registration letter for income tax. Okay. So the content of the letter will include one, the name of the organization has to be stated in the letter, the registered office of the organization, the business address of the organization, the precise nature of what business. With the example I gave previously using Larry Limited, let's say the nature of business is general goods and services, general contractor, as the case may be. So the precise nature of business that organization is involved in has to be specified in the letter. Then the date of commencement of business, the date that the organization commences business complete fully will also be stated on the letter, because from that date that FRS will be able to calculate if that falls within the 6 months period as stated by the law for registration. Okay, within from that date they can now calculate 6 months forward to know if your registration with FRS is within the 6 months or it has exceeded the 6 months of registration. Then in addition to that, name and addresses of bankers, the banks that the organization have accounts in or has opened accounts in, the names of the bank has to be listed in the letter. The addresses of each of the branches also have to be listed in the letter. Then particulars of major shareholders. All these details are required for the purpose of what? Income tax. Then in addition, some documents are expected to be added. One, we have the certificate of incorporation, okay, which certifies that the organization is actually what's incorporated in Nigeria. Then in addition, we have memorandum and articles of organization, then Form CAC2 and Form CAC7. These documents will be added, will be in addition to the letter to be submitted to FRS for company income tax registration. For the second form of registration, which is value added tax, okay, another letter will be provided, okay, including the previous details we have listed for company income tax. will also be on the same letter for value added tax. But the documents that will be added will be a completed copy of VAT Form 001. There's a form to be filled, okay, VAT Form 001, which is needed for VAT registration, and also certificate of what? Incorporation. Okay. I know someone asked if it's important for us to know this theory aspect of taxation. Yes, it is very important because for this diet you're expected to write, you're writing taxation, I guess, for December diet, and you have your exam comes into section. You have section A and section B. Your section A contains 20 questions, 20 multiple choice questions, okay? Where you have questions in form of objective. You have questions and you have options to pick from. You have a question and you have option A to D or A to E to select and answer from. So these 20 questions in section A, most of them are usually from the theory aspect of taxation. So it's important for you to know you can be asked for the necessary documents are required for value added tax registration or company income tax registration. And if you have no idea, you will likely not be able to attempt it correctly. So please, it's important. Aside just passing the exam, it's also important for us to know this, because in our day-to-day practice as accountants, it will be required and needed. Okay, so no knowledge is wasted. All right, so know your chartered accountant in training. So let's continue. So after the registration of the FRS and value added tax, okay, which is expected at the beginning of when a company just commences business, aside that, on a yearly basis, the company will be expected to file tax returns. File tax returns once in every year, okay? They'll file it, send it to FIRS, and documents are also required. I've listed 3 earlier on. I said self-assessment form, audited financial statement, income tax and capital allowance computation schedules. Then in addition to that, okay, we have completed copy of company income tax. It's a form, okay? It's a form. You just fill the details. The details that are usually required are already contained in your detailed statements most times. So you just extract the information, fill the form, and the signatories, which is the director of the organization, managing director, and the secretary, we also would sign. They have completed form for education tax, which is known as tertiary education tax. Okay, the evidence of payment of company income tax liability. If the company income tax liability has been paid, Okay, the evidence of payment will be attached. Will be attached to the necessary document. Okay, sorry about that. I think it's a network issue. I was trying to connect again. So please let's continue. Thank you. So as I was saying, the registration letter for value added tax, okay. Then for filing, in addition to the previous document I've listed, there's a form for company income tax which will be filled, a form for education tax which will also be what filled, the evidence of payment, if any payment have been made for company income tax, the evidence of payment have to be what attached, excuse me, to the necessary what document. For education tax too, any evidence of payments is expected to be attached. Okay. So what's the time limit for filing of tax returns or submitting audited accounts like we've stated? For every company, for every existing company, for a new company, okay, you register, that's the process. But for an existing company, a company that has existed, it's expected that, rather, it's mandatory, it's statutorily required that all audited accounts and income tax returns by all companies, either new or existing, should what file returns 6 months after the end of the company's accounting year in the case of an old company. Like Larry Limited. Let's say Larry Limited is an existing company. Okay. The accounts of 2018, the accounting period from the example I gave before, the accounting period is January to December of every year, right? So what it means is that for the year 2018, for 2018 accounts, the year of assessment is 2019. When I say the year of assessment is 2019, I believe you understand. What it means is that 2018 year account would have come to an end, and the year of assessment, the year you file tax return, is the following year, which is what 2019. So if the accounting period is January to December, it's expected that within 6 months after the end of the company's accounting year, the end of the company's accounting year there is December. So within 6 months, it's expected that the company should what file, which means from January 2019 to June 2019, Larry Limited has to file his tax return and submit his audited account and all other documents required to FIRS. But if it's a newly incorporated company, aside registration, when it comes to filing, if it's a newly incorporated company, a company that just got incorporated, within 18 months from the date of incorporation, or 6 months after the end of his first accounting period, whichever comes earlier. Let me take it again. Filing of tax return comes in two forms. One, we have for existing company. Secondly, we have for what? for newly incorporated company. So let's take the first one. For existing company, it's expected that they should file returns 6 months after the end of the company's accounting period. If the company's accounting period is July to June every year, please confirm you can hear me clearly. Okay. Please confirm you can. If you can hear me clearly, just send a chat so we can be on the same page. All right. I do not. I just want to confirm I'm not talking to myself. Okay. Thank you very much, Smith. Clearly, thank you very much. So let's continue. So it's expected at 6 months. If the company's accounting year period or year is from July to June every year. So what it means is that from July, August, September, October, November, December, within July and December of the following year, they must file tax return to FRS. But if it's a company that is just incorporated, which is the second one, which I mentioned earlier, okay, 18 months after the date of incorporation or 6 months after the end of its first accounting period, whichever comes earlier. That's what tax authority will use. Okay. So that takes us to the next. It says time within which to pay tax assessed. What is the time period expected for? What's the time period expected for companies to pay the tax that they've been assessed on? So after the tax consultant, okay, has completed the tax assessment for the organization. Let's say their company income tax is 200,000, 213,000 naira. The education tax is about 40,000 naira. Education tax is 2% of accessible profit. Okay, so that's paid. For the company income tax, when are they expected to pay that amount to FRS? If the organization has actually, if the company has made payment for company income tax, remember the evidence of payment to be attached to those documents that to be submitted annually. But aside that, statutory, what's required is that for FRS, within 2 months after the service of notice upon the company is expected to pay for its tax. Or, however, where the 2 months expires after the 14th day of December of the assessment year, for which the tax is charged, any outstanding balance shall become payable no later than that date, which is 14th day of December of the assessment year. You are expected to pay within 2 months. Okay, like the example I gave, where I said from January to if the accounting period is from January to June, which is Lanre Limited, January to December, sorry. So what it means is that from January 2019 to June 2019, Lanre Limited is to file, right? So they file. When they file, their company income tax is the one I gave before, 230,000, the education tax. When are they expected to pay? They're expected to pay within 2 months after the service of notice to the company. I will explain service of notice when we get to types of assessment, okay? But what it means is that latest, if 2 months expires, at least payment should be made at least by 14th day of December in the year of assessment. So what it means is that 14th December 2019, payment for tax has to be made towards FIROS. Okay. So are there penalties for non-compliance? If the companies do not comply, are there penalties? Do they get to make any form of payment to FRS? Yes, there are penalties, okay? And provisions have been made under the tax law for such penalties. Minutes, please. Network is fluctuating. Okay, yes, there are actually penalties Company Income Tax Act makes provisions for penalties for payment of penalty. Okay, if any company fails to comply with the requirements in terms of filing of tax returns, if an existing company do not file tax return within 6 months, what penalties are they expected to pay? One, for the first month that they fail to file the annual returns, they will pay 25,000 naira in the first month. And for other subsequent months, 5,000 naira will be paid subsequently, as long as they fail to file for the annual returns. So let me go back to the example I've been using previously, which is Larry Limited. Larry Limited for 2018 accounts, right, expected to file within January 2019 and June 2019, right, which is 6 months. So let's say Larry Limited do not file his tax returns from January to June, and June 2019 expires. June has 30 days, right? So by 1st of July, if the month of July, if Larry Limited fails to file tax return, Larry Limited will pay 25,000 naira as penalty for July. If it's by August 2019, it fails to file, Larry Limited will pay 5,000 naira. That's how much in total? 30,000 naira penalty, aside the company income tax expected to pay and the education tax expected to pay. All right. So every month that the company fails to pay, 5,000 naira will be paid subsequently. But for the first month, it's 25,000 naira. Okay. Then in addition, there's also penalty for directors, managers, secretary, servant, or those that are what work as staffs in a defaulting company, or directors, or those that manage a company that defaults in terms of filing of annual returns. If they are proved to be guilty, okay, probably out of negligence, all right, or they connive and do not file, that's actually what an offense to the what, to the commission, an offense of non-compliance, either based on negligence, connivance, as the case may be. All right, these individuals are liable to a fine of 100,000 naira or an imprisonment of 2 years, or both may be served to such individual. So that's the penalty for what's non-compliance. So let's look at other returns. Okay, for other returns, for other returns, in addition to filing of tax returns, okay, other documents actually what require. Some companies, for example, we have banks, we have store broking companies, okay. For when it comes to tax authority, which is FRS, banks are expected that every company engaged in banking business, all banks, they are required to submit to FRS within 7 days after the end of a month the names of their new customers, the addresses of their newcomers for the preceding month. So what it means is that every bank at the end of the month, let's say January 2020, within 7 days in February 2020, they're expected to send the names of all their new customers and the addresses of January 2022 FRS. Okay, their names and contact addresses are sent to what? To FRS. Aside that, we have stockbroking companies. They're also required, okay? Every company operating the floor of the NSE, which is Nigeria Stock Exchange, okay? They are required that within 7 days after the end of each calendar month to file with FRS a return for the preceding calendar month. The information to be contained in the returns are as follows. Please give me 2 minutes. Let me change to another network. It looks unstable here. Sorry for the break. Okay, I think this is much better. Thank you for your patience. So let's continue, please. So for banks and for stock broking companies, okay, those are the what requirements. Then in addition for stockbroking companies, the transactions include offers in the primary market, type of offers, services that were rendered, amount of tax deducted at source, and amount of value added tax what's payable. Okay. So So let's look at the assessment procedures. We looked at returns, right? So the next is what assessment procedures. Then we'll look at our collection procedures before we look at tax clearance certificates. So the next is what for assessment procedures. For assessment procedures, what is expected or required? Where a company has filed self-assessment returns, okay, comprises of its audited accounts and tax computation based thereon, the FRS may accept the returns as made if found satisfactory, okay? So what it means is that, the self-assessment is what is usually sent by the owner of the organization, like Larry Limited, with that example I gave, okay? At the end of the year, Larry will go and what? Remit to FRS and submit those forms to FRS. But that's for the self-assessment forms. So FRS on their own parts, they may either accept the returns if they find it satisfactory. So when Larry Limited submits to file to FRS or the tax consultants file, what they'll do is that FRS will now what on their own part, they will go through the documents that have been submitted. They'll go through the documents that have been submitted, and then they will now confirm if the form of taxation paid by this organization is satisfactory. If it's not satisfactory, okay, they will have to send a notice of assessment to the organization. All right. So at the expiration of the time limit, which is the 6 months for an existing company or for a new company like we have mentioned, okay? At the end of that period, for the submission of tax returns, audited account and tax computation, FRS can then proceed to assess every company that failed to file its self-assessment tax returns. So what it means is that if that period that is required for the organization to file, when that period comes to an end and no assessment returns has been received by FRS will go ahead to what? They'll go ahead to file their own form of assessment to these companies or organizations. So let's look at self-assessment. When we say self-assessment, there are forms of what assessment. We have self-assessment, which is the one that is generally known, the most commonly known form of what assessments. Okay, it's a system of tax administration where the taxpayer is the one that is granted the right by law to compute his own tax liability. He pays the tax due, he files his tax returns, and also send evidence of payment of the tax paid on or before the due date towards FIRS. Okay, and what FIRS are expected to do is to accept all the tax returns submitted by the taxpayer. They will carry out all necessary checks to ensure that the information that's been provided by this company or this taxpayer is accurate, is satisfactory, okay, and it also would correspond with all necessary tax requirements. All right. So a company that files self-assessment return is required to pay the tax in one lump sum on the due date of filing. However, the tax law also allows payment in installment, but it does not exceed 6 installments. When it comes to payment of installments, when it comes to payment of tax, in terms of installments, okay? What is allowed is that before you file returns to FRS, the first form of installment has to be made. Let's say the company income tax is ₦1,000,000 and the organization intends to pay such amount in installment. So what they'll do is that they'll need to write a letter addressing it to FRS, letting them know the company income tax due to the company for that current year of assessment, okay? Explain the reason why they will need to pay in installment. The instrumental payments should be made clearly on the letter also, but it's not more than 6 installments that is allowed. So the first installment, let's say they intend to pay 5 times in terms of paying 200,000 naira each. So the first installment is 200,000 naira. The organization is expected to pay the first installment pay the first installment. So that first installment, the evidence of payment will be attached to the letter and no other documents, then submitted to FRS. So consideration will also be given when the first installment has been paid before filing for tax returns. All right. Then the other installments, payments can be made as at when due, as at the date that has been proposed in the letter by the taxpayer or the organization. Okay. So after that, let's move on, please. So we have additional assessments where FRS, okay, where FRS discovers or for additional assessment, if FRS discovers or if they have the opinion that the company liable to pay tax, one, if the company liable to pay tax has not been assessed, or they've been assessed for an amount which is less than the actual amount chargeable, all right, an additional assessment to be made to the company involved. So additional assessment comes in 2 forms, okay, for an organization. One, when an organization has not been assessed or it has been assessed for an amount that is less than the actual amount chargeable. Okay, and this when we say for the first one, if they've not been assessed, which means the organization has not even filed its tax returns during the 6 months required for it to file, or if it's a new company, the period required for it to file. But for an organization that has been assessed for an amount that is lower, they've the 6 months has actually exceeded and they filed, but the amount realized or calculated by the tax authority is actually more than what the organization has charged itself as company income tax. Therefore, an additional assessment will have to be made by the FIRS to such organizations. So for the implication of this is that within 6 years, when it comes to additional assessments, FIRS can go as far back as 6 years for the purpose of raising additional assessments for the organization, okay? Or if they discover that tax has not been paid, an organization has not paid tax for several years, they're allowed to go as far back as 6 years and calculate and assess the organization and forward the notice of assessment to the organization. Okay, so this takes us to best of judgment assessment. All right, so for best of judgment assessment for FIRS, okay, best of judgment assessment, if FIRS has assessed a company based on its best of judgment, is actually done in two situations. One, where a company files its returns, audited account and tax computation, and the company may refuse to accept same, and the tax authority has refused to accept same if they found unsatisfactory. Okay, that's one case. Then they issue what we call best of judgment, or where the company's or total profits, the company's total profit is then used to assess the organization. So a best of judgment is given by FIRS to such organization when they determine that the information submitted by the organization is not satisfactory. Secondly, where a company has failed to submit a self-assessment return, audited accounts, etc., and FIRS have the opinion that the company is liable to tax, it can then proceed to give its best of judgment. They will determine the total profit of such company and raise an assessment. And someone may ask, how can FIRS determine the total profit of an organization? FIRS actually have access. They have access to. They have access to details of companies. Remember, previously I mentioned that banks, they're expected to send the names, right, and addresses of all those that have opened accounts during the previous month. They are new customers, right? And while submitting your details to FIRS when you are registering, the banks, the addresses are also listed there. So FIRS have a way of actually checking the accounts of these organizations, and they can generate or give a rough estimate of how much the organization have generated within a period of time. And if it's actually if it's far above what was disclosed, then an assessment to be made, which will be sent to the organization. The tax consultants will then need to respond. Probably if the information that is actually being perceived by FIRS, the details of the information may not be accurate, they can then go ahead to defend the company or the organization. So there's what we call service of notice of assessment. How long does it take to service of notice or assessment? FIRS are expected to arrange, or they are expected to send or serve the notice to a registered company. They send it by post, okay, and is usually addressed in the name of the company that is charged. And the notice of assessment have three major details: on the amount of total profits, the tax payable, and the place at which such tax should be paid, which means the location of the tax office such tax should be paid will also be stated in the letter. And we have what we call final and conclusive assessment. When an assessment is final and conclusive, We say an assessment is final and conclusive when one, no valid objection or appeal has been made or lodged against the amount of total profits assessed on a company within the time statutorily allowed for that purpose. All right. No, while after the company has gone ahead to send a notice of assessment, after FRS has gone ahead to send a notice of assessment to the company, and then no objection has been made, no appeal has been received, it is then that it's then conclusive to say that the assessment, is final and conclusive. All right. Secondly, if the amount of total profit has been agreed by the taxpayer after his objection has been determined by FRS, it is known as final and conclusive assessment. Then thirdly, when the amount of total profit has been determined on appeal. All right. So let's go to collection procedures. How does the tax authority collect tax? Every company is expected to pay provisional tax in one lump sum, right? We've mentioned that before. Or they're also allowed to pay in installments, okay? And the provision of tax is on payment of account of the tax, which is payable by a company for a year of assessment, okay? So for the time limit for paying tax, okay, depends on whether or not the taxpayer has been determined by an assessment raised by FRS or self-assessment filed by the company. Okay, for currency of payment of tax, what currency is the company expected to remit towards tax? For income tax charge on a company shall be paid in the currency of the transaction. That is the currency in which the currency in which the income gives rise to the tax, the currency in which the income that gives rise to the tax was derived and paid to the company. So the currency in which the organization was carried out such transaction is the currency in which they will use to remit the income tax to FRS. If the company's transaction are in a foreign currency, tax shall be payable in the foreign currency. If they're in our own local currency, okay, the tax will be paid in such currency, which is Naira. All right. So let's continue, please. Sorry, my network is a bit slow. Kindly bear with me. So this takes us to the next, which is tax clearance certificate. It's known as TCC. Okay, it's a document that is issued by relevant tax authority for companies. A TCC tax clearance certificate is issued by FRS. For individuals, TCC is issued by the State of Internal Revenue Service. All right, so for TCC, the tax clearance certificate just shows the true tax position of a taxpayer to whom it is issued. All right, so the certificate is issued upon application by the taxpayer. The taxpayer will afterwards apply in writing to the relevant tax authority, requesting for its tax clearance certificate. When issuing the certificate, the relevant tax authority would have satisfied itself that the tax assessed on the income applicant for the 3 years are accurate. So the tax clearance certificate, I don't know if some of us have seen how seen a tax clearance certificate to have an idea of how it looks like. Okay. So it's a certificate that shows the true position of a taxpayer. The tax clearance certificate usually have details of 3 years. 3 years shows the tax details or the tax position of the individual organization company for 3 years. All right. So in the certificate is usually what must be issued after writing in application to the relevant tax authority within 2 weeks is expected to be what issued to the individual or the company. But in Nigeria, I think that's part of the issues when it comes to tax clearance certificates. Let me call it limitation of tax clearance certificates. Okay, the individual, the company do not receive it as at when due, but according to the law, it's expected that these individuals or organizations should receive it within 2 weeks of what of demand. However, tax clearance certificates usually the tax clearance certificate usually what contains details, like I was saying. All right. One, we have the tax clearance certificate number. There's usually a number on the tax clearance certificate. Okay. The tax office that issued such certificate, the name of the tax office will be stated there, the address of the tax office. Okay. The date of issue of tax clearance certificate, the name of the organization, the ROC number of the organization, the date, excuse me, the date of incorporation of the organization, the taxpayer's identification number, the effective business address of the organization. Then for the 3 years, the details that will show, one, the revenue or turnover for each year will appear on the certificate. The assessable profit or loss for each year will appear on the certificate. The total profit of each year will appear on the certificate. The tax payable the tax payable of the tax payable for each year will also appear on the what on the certificate. Then, if any taxes are standing, it also be stated on the certificate, of which is rare because part of the conditions for granting tax clearance certificate, tax authority have to ensure that you are not what you do not what you paid all your tax up to date. You are not owing any tax. You do not have any tax that is what overdue. All right. So the sources of income will be stated or any other comment, and then the expiration date of the tax clearance certificate will also be stated there. Conditions for granting tax clearance certificates. For tax clearance certificates, conditions are one, the tax must be paid up to date. The penalties or interest rates must have been paid if the company or the individual um, are expected to pay penalties on interest due to not filing on time or due to one tax law that has been avoided or broke. They'll have to pay for the penalties on interest up to date. The returns must have been filed up to date. The returns must be filed up to date, and there will be no outstanding tax or queries or audits or investigation. Okay, so there are cases where a tax clearance certificate is required. All right, some transactions that will be carried out that a tax clearance certificate will be required, and it's mandatory to provide the TCC before such transactions cannot occur. One, we have application for government loan. If you want to apply for government loan in any industry, in any business, tax clearance certificate of that company or individual is usually required. Registration of motor vehicle, application for firearm license, application for foreign exchange. Okay, tax clearance certificate is required. Or exchange control permission to remit funds outside Nigeria, tax clearance certificate is required. If you are applying for certificate of occupancy, tax clearance certificate is required. So in this part, when it comes to transaction that a tax clearance certificate can be required for, this can also come in your objective section, which is your section A. You could be required to or even your section B, you could be required to list out seven transactions where a tax clearance certificate is required or needed. okay? Or in your objective question section A, some of these transactions will be listed to you, maybe 3 correct, 1 incorrect, and you'll be expected to answer. So please, you may not know all these, but try to have an idea of at least 10, okay? Yes, 10. So application for if you are to be awarded any contract, especially by government, their agencies or any registered company, tax clearance certificate to be required. Approval for building plans, application for trade license, application for transfer of real property, application for imports or exports license, application for agent license, application for pools or gaming license, application for registration as a contractor, application for distributorship. All right. All of this will be a tax clearance certificate will have to be what provided. Confirmation of appointment by government as chairman or member of public board, institution, commission, company, or to any other similar position made by government. Stamping of guarantors form for Nigerian passport. Application for registration of a limited liability company or of a business name. So these are many more transactions um, that tax clearance certificate is required for. So what is the procedure for processing tax clearance certificates? All right. The taxpayer will apply in writing, okay, and send to the relevant tax authority. And those ones are expected to also what to produce the tax clearance certificate within 2 weeks. TCC is a very important document that is necessary for various corporate transactions in Nigeria. In fact, if you want to carry out contracts in Nigeria, always ensure you have the organization have its own tax clearance certificate for the preceding, for the pre, for the last year of assessment. Okay, because it's usually what's requested for when it comes to contracts. Okay, so therefore a company has to carries out a taxable transaction. A company that carries out a taxable transaction is eligible to register for issuance of what tax clearance certificate. Okay, TCC shall be dependent on whether the applicant is a new company or is an existing company. So for a new company, if a new company wants to obtain TCC, what's the necessary procedure? Okay, for it to obtain TCC. TCC one, it has to register with FRS to obtain its tax identification number, which has now been made mandatory. Okay, all any organization must have its tax identification number. So the company can choose to either engage the service of a consultant or they carry out that's a tax consultant, or they carry out the registration by itself through an employee, probably the accountant of the organization, okay, or the finance director, as the case may be. All right. So notwithstanding who the company or the tax consultant, if they have a position created for a tax, a staff who carries out the tax operations of the organization, that can also be what's done. Notwithstanding who the company chooses for this exercise, the company will need to write a formal application letter in a format. There's this precise prescribed format for it. So FRS, okay, and the following documents we have to be provided. One, certificates of incorporation have to be provided, memorandum and articles of association, from CAC 2, from CAC 7, okay. The details of the letter are similar to that of a new company when they are registering with us for VAT and withholding tax. The name of the company, the registered address, the business address, the precise nature of business, the date of commencement of business, name and address of the bankers, particulars of what major shareholders. Okay, so all of these details will be what will be provided. They also have validation of issued thing. Or for, okay, we've talked about FRS and VAT already. So for payment of pre-operation levy and submission for detailed financial statement, okay, for a newly incorporated company that is yet to commence business, after 6 months of incorporation. And then they require a tax clearance certificate. What they are expected to do is to pay what we call a pre-operation levy, POL in short form. So they pay a pre-operation levy of 25,000 naira for the first year, and 20,000 is payable for subsequent years until the companies file a notice of commencement of business. So if a company is incorporated, after 6 months, they've not commenced business, they'll pay a what pre-operation levy of 25,000 naira for the first year, and 20,000 is payable for subsequent year until the company files a notice of commencement of business. All right. So for application of tax clearance certificate, as soon as they submit the necessary documents to the tax authority, okay, within 2 weeks, okay, there will have to be evidence of payment also. The company can then apply for TCC. Now, these days, they do it electronically, okay, just go to the FRS website, find the right clicks there, make the necessary details, upload your evidence of payment, and within this stipulated time, a tax clearance certificate is provided to an organization that has been incorporated but has not commenced business. So processes and insurance of tax clearance, as soon as the company has filed for application, FRS will then commence with processing. However, FRS shall approve TCC within 2 weeks of application. Once the TCC is approved, an electronic email confirmation shall be sent to the company, and the company shall subsequently download a copy of your TCC. But if it's an existing company, okay, payment of income tax and filing of tax returns will have to be done, because the existing company, we have to ensure that it does not have any tax due towards FRS. All right. So for penalties, for tax clearance certificate, are there penalties for TCC? Yes. The penalties for example, if an individual, for the purpose of, if an individual obtains a tax clearance certificate that is fake or that gives an incorrect information, there are a few cases where people forge tax clearance certificates. Excuse me. So if this is found out, or such information that the tax clearance certificate gives incorrect information in relation to any matter or anything that affects the liability of an organization when it comes to tax, that affects its tax liability, or it counterfeits or falsifies any document that is required by or for the transaction of any business. Okay, as listed in the first schedule of the Act, such offense is liable to a conviction to a fine not exceeding 200,000 or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years, or both is made to such individual. When it comes to FRS, tax clearance certificate, are there problems of tax clearance certificate? Yes, I listed part of the problem, which is the fact that the statutory is expected that within 2 weeks, rather, it should remit. However, for tax clearance certificate, tax clearance certificate should be issued to the taxpayer who requests for it. However, although for tax clearance certificate, it's usually issued based on tax compliance for the preceding year. The tax authorities sometimes require that taxpayer comply with tax payments to date of application for the certificate. This poses challenge because the Revenue Service could use that opportunity to issue additional assessment and demand for payment, and payment will have to be made by such taxpayer before any certificate can be issued. Also, it usually takes a longer period to be issued. Like I said, this is Nigeria. Most cases, it's usually received even after 2 weeks as stipulated by law. Okay, so notwithstanding the 2 weeks that has been stated, the tax clearance certificate can also be received in a longer period after that date. Okay. So a taxpayer can also lose an opportunity to win. Let's say it's also the purpose of a contract, and the taxpayer just had a limit of 3 weeks, and the tax clearance certificate is received after a month or 2 months. So that alone can affect a major contract or the ability for the taxpayer to utilize the tax clearance certificate for the purpose of a transaction, which could generate income for such taxpayer or its organization. All right, so those are part of the problems of a tax clearance certificate. Okay. So that is all for today. All right, for today's class for returns, assessment, and collection period. I actually have questions I want to share for the purpose of this class, so we could just, most of them have been treated. Most of them have been treated, so I think I'll just send that to the group. I just have a short question, okay, based on this topic. So most of them have been treated already. I'll just send it in addition to the material that was sent previously. Okay, so that'll be all for today. If you have any question, kindly send your questions. So we'll treat them. I'll treat it. Any question? Any question? Please, I want response from everybody in the class. Okay. If you have any question, kindly send it in. Any question? Okay, I have one already. Okay, no, kindness said no. Okay. Any question? Please do not be shy to ask your question. Okay. Any question, please? Okay, none for now. Okay. No, okay, none from Mariam. Okay, so I believe we understood everything. If we are asked questions on returns, assessments, collection period, okay, either objective or theory, we'll be able to attend it fully. Okay. All right. Okay, no question for now. That'll be all for today. Thank you very much. We'll meet same time. Thank you very much. That'll be all for today. So our next class for taxation will be on Saturday. All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful night rest. It's good night from me.